We're live.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Larsen. Welcome for joining me. Have the opportunity with the folk school to show some of the work that I enjoy, which is particularly a whole variety of things related to stitchery and embroidery. And I wanted to start out by showing you the diversity that's possible, and this is just the beginning. Some of these pieces I've done several years ago, and this one in particular has different yarn that allows all these loose ends and buttons to doing more traditional pieces that portray specific flowers. And I did these with the thought of possibly sometime actually teaching a class here in silk ribbon embroidery. So I developed pieces that would show that. I also have, this is a very old piece that I've had hanging in my bedroom. It's more of a traditional style, as well as something, this is a piece that still needs to be framed, but I did this past winter, and this is under the seascape. So I'm picturing the ocean bottom with all the possibilities, and because I'm developing these ideas out of my own imagination, the sky is the limit. I can pick out any colors or materials, and I'm going for textures, so I especially enjoy adding beads and varieties of the widths of the pieces of novelty yarns, and I've got some cheesecloth here and things. So this was really fun to do. You know, they're all labors of love that require a lot of time and putziness, but I come up with an idea, and I have no idea sometimes where it's ending, and a lot of my inspiration comes from the materials that I have, and those materials often come from pieces that people have donated to me, scraps of wool that are too small, or pieces of scarf or things, and so many of these pieces just require really tiny things, and so I'll use a combination. In this case, like, this is Nuno felted background with some silk scarf in there, and then I just add beads and different stitches. These are handmade buttons that I made several years ago. I've got quite the stash. Some of it is quite old, and sooner or later they just evolve into something that I had no idea what they'd end up as, but it's been really fun to make use of the things through the years. I also like to make things that are useful too, and this is a needle case that I made several years ago, and this is crazy quilting style with different types of ribbon and stitches on here, and it's so fun when I'm working on things to pull out a needle out of something that I've made that has a lot of different colors, and it's just having a working environment that I enjoy, as well as the final product of usefulness with things. Like, this is a needle or a scissor case that I made actually several years ago, and this is something I made this winter. This was inspired from this is the winter edition of Piecework, and I saw this needle sewing roll on top of here, and I was inspired to try and make this. And this is actually a vintage sewing roll from about the 1900 time period, and so it involved a lot of direction, and it's got loops for holding your sewing threads. This is the pin cushion, and this is the thimble that it holds in place there, and then these are leaves for putting different sizes of needles in here. This was a real challenge for me. I've gotten to the point where I don't like to follow directions. And I found with this, there were a lot of directions, and some of them didn't quite make sense to me, so I read them over and over. And the directions and the whole idea of this is from Dawn Cook Ronigan, and she showed pictures, and for the most part I stayed with pretty much what she was doing. With some of the embellishing I took a little bit different direction with, and so this is what I used. And the sewing rolls have been used for centuries. They initially started with people that used animal skins, and they contained bone needles and sinew and things, and as over the years, as materials became available, it changed, and men, women, and children had these sewing rolls, and they were considered essential for maintaining your textiles. And they evolved with materials being available, and after the Industrial Revolution, velvet became much more prevalent and available and affordable, and so a lot of these kits were made with velvet. And this is the sewing kits. That's a theme that the folk school has taken on. I know they've had an instructor doing Sami sewing rolls and other people, and so I thought it would be fun to do some sort of variation for it, trying out this idea here. And I do little things. This was a gift for my mom, so they can be small or big, more involved or more simple. Which leads me to showing you some of the pieces that I stashed. I lived in Alaska for 10 years and was involved with the Bead Society, and there were wonderful bead stores there, as well as this woman that I bought this lace from turned her living room into a storefront for hand-dyed lace and silk ribbons and things that really inspired me. Here's a piece I probably started 18 years ago and kind of lost interest, and then this winter I kind of took it up and continued, and I found things that I started out with having, and I come back to several years later, I have new ideas. And part of my thought with when I make things is to try to create some movement into it. So that's always one of the forefronts of things that kind of, evolve into sliding into each other. And I also, I guess at the fiber retreat, doing little samples, and these are on fabric upholstery samples that I just cut up. And here's a piece that I felted years ago, and I'm just starting to play with that too. And then I'll put this on a backing. It'll probably be a backing kind of similar to this when I get done with this. Just seeing some of these pieces have been around for a while and maybe just completed or fairly new. But the latest thing I've really been focusing on is Birch Tree Art. And here's an example where I've actually dyed all of the fabric to create these trees, and that's what I'll be showing you, demonstrating in a few minutes here, and then just embellished on the bottom here. And I've been playing with some different sizes, and so this is one I did. This is actually a pin and I did a pendant that was even smaller than this, but it's cutting up the fabrics for the birch trees from all hand-dyed fabrics. And then this is a garland that I made, and it's to reflect the the seasons, the 4 seasons. And also it's kind of, I think of the birch trees as an ode to the North Shore. They're so significant, prominent when you drive up the shore, and a lot of the dead, dying, still standing, they just reflect so much of part of what this place is. And also with this procedure, with this form of dyeing, it also makes me think of the rocks on the North Shore, which is very much a part of it, and the fissures and the lichens and the dark markings that just around with using different wools. And some of these, actually this with the yellow had turmeric used on it, and some different flowers and vegetable, little stitchery, some bees leaves. So a lot of this is just kind of imagining. Things may be really clear to you, and some things may be just suggestive, and it's really fun to explore. Here's another example of that, and that just eventually, with these pieces were more obvious to me what I could see, and I can still see, you know, this is one side of it and this is the other side, so I'm not sure which I will be going for, but this actually was the hem of an old coat, a scrap that a friend gave to me of a cream colored coat, and I've been exploring with actually dyeing it and then embroidering on it. So it's just play with things that kind of lost their use in other ways, and I'll show you with these fabrics here. See, I showed you, this is silk. This is a silk chiffon, but I also don't go up too much on here, but I just discovered by having it a little bit more subtle that I'm playing around with a middle ground, foreground, and background, and so having these different types of fabric really gives me more options. Here's one that, this is one of my favorites, and this actually looks like it had some berries or some sort of flower on there, so you can see purple on here. And some of these are old cloth napkins that were given to me, and you never know how anything's going to turn out for sure, so you end up with quite a variety. And it's the oxidization, which I'll explain, of the iron with the steaming process, and here's more of a gray. So I think of all these as possibilities for different kinds of trees. And here's a piece that actually it's a textured cotton fabric that I've used to just give some variety. And then I made a little t-shirt for my grandson that this is a cotton t-shirt, so you can apply these ideas to clothing as well. So I actually have a pot here that I use, and I have a hot plate that the folk school offered to me, but I've done this on my stove at home. And I cooked up a bundle, which I'm going to open up and show you how this turned out, and then I'll bundle a piece to put in here. So with this pot, I have a piece of metal in here so that your bundles don't sit directly in the water. And then you just set your bundle on top. And you want to be careful. A lot of times I just pick up things without using gloves, and I don't mind it, but you have black acetate around your fingernail beds for the next 4 days, so I'm going to be cautious today, and I'm going to actually put on some gloves, and I'll open up this bundle for you and we can see how things turned out. And I'll actually open it up on this piece of fabric here that I'll be using for the next bundle. And this fabric is actually, it's old dish towels that a friend had given me that actually have some embroidery on them that were in the family. And with so many of the things that I use, you wonder what the story is. You know, the kitchen that these were in, and all the people through the years wiping, drying dishes, and the coats that were worn, and you know, who wore them and where did they go. So I think there's a bit of a story in all of these repurposed materials here. And I bundled this up pretty good, so I'm going to have to do some yanking here to get this up.
You want to wave to the audience?
Okay. Thank you for stopping by. Yeah, so these are pieces of wire that I've used to bundle this, and this is called contact dyeing. And the key thing about it is having a tight bundle, so you truly do have contact to let things, the results, have more of a chance of happening.
What kind of wire is that?
This is, I think it's a bright wire. It's a non-galvanized, so you want something that's going to have the ability to actually rust. And I actually have some string tying this together too, which I'm going to cut here.
And what's the liquid in the pot?
The liquid is pure, well, it was pure water in there, and then when I do my demonstration bundle, I will be putting the metals, placing them on the fabric, as well as vinegar here. And the vinegar helps with the oxidization process of the metals, and helps them to, and then with the heat and the steam, and I actually had some of my pieces I probably have only steamed for about an hour or so, but I actually had this in there for a couple of hours yesterday, and on the hot plate that was provided by the folk school. And one of the things, when I open this up, there'll be nails and things, and I'm not, because I'm using this fabric largely for trees or some sort of collage idea, I'm not worried about poking holes in this. But when you're using metal, especially nails or pieces of screen and things, they're very sharp, and so if you were to do this on more fragile fibers like silk, you do run the risk of poking holes, which I have done, so you'd want to be very careful. But I've found, you know, there's a use for everything in the world just about here, and so this is some sort of discarded metal thing. And the more you use these pieces, the blacker sometimes they can create. And this is a piece of pipe here, and you can actually, here's a piece of screen with a sizable nail here, and the screen leaves these patterns here that you can see that the results, and then of course the nail will have some of these vertical, and then I just had a whole mix of actually some sizable spike size nails and some other pieces in here, and I don't know, whatever you can find. You know, the first time I tried this idea and I came up with, something like this, and I thought, wow, this looks like somebody just changed the oil and on their car and wiped their hands. You know, what am I going to do with this? Or, you know, it's not as colorful as I love to work with. And then the more I looked at it, and plus coming up a few more pieces of variations, I just could see trees in it, and it just kind of took me in a whole new direction. So I'm still pulling out, I don't know, there's pieces of, I don't know what this metal that came off of some of these too, and I'll hold this up. So you can see this was a big piece of fabric. A lot of times I work with smaller pieces, and some of this, where the bigger pieces of metal were directly with, had contact with it, and this hole was actually in the fabric beforehand, that it comes darker, and then you can, and then this has, you know, more open with more white showing in it, and you can always redo this again if you want to have an entire piece darker. But I found the variety actually inspires me to, like I mentioned earlier with the background, foreground, and midground, it kind of gives you some opportunities with that. So this is what this looked like. And so now I'm just going to, I have a little bit smaller piece of fabric here, and I'm just going to lay some of these same things. Maybe I'll leave this really long one. You can see the acetate really builds up, and a lot of stuff comes off on this, and that's the vinegar reacting with the heat and the steam. And I'll try another piece of pipe in here, and so nails removed from old houses or projects that are crooked and bent, you think just throw them away, especially the older nails are non-galvanized. Well, here is a use for them if this is anything that interests you. And like I mentioned, and I'm going to put some vinegar on this. And I know somebody that actually did a whole line of clothing with this idea. And so there's a lot of possibilities. I also know somebody, fiber artist from Australia, that would bury her cloth in the ground, and so the minerals from the soil would leach into the fabric and kind of stain it and give her interesting colors. And again, it's kind of doing that on your land with something, maybe some sort of a cherished keepsake. I think she was doing a quilt with it, and it just added more dimension to what it was all about. And I think it was something for a brother or somebody she was making. And so I'm just gonna kind of want to make sure.
Is that just pure vinegar?
It's pure vinegar. So this is an extremely inexpensive way to come up with doing something if this sort of thing interests you. And so kind of carefully, kind of feeling the nails, and I want to make sure that I get this pretty tight. And again, I'm not worried about poking holes in this piece. I'm going to put some screen in here, cut up from an old screen, because I like those marks. You know, you can just, tree bark has so much character to it, and this is a way to kind of create some of that with just playing around and experimenting, and with little, I might have to tuck this farther in here. Oh, there's even an old paper clip. I didn't know this was in here. That might have been an accident. And so I'm going to tuck that in there as well. So idea, again, is to create good contact. This is contact dyeing, and or sometimes it's also called eco dyeing, using plants and vegetables. And India Flint was really kind of inspired the world with going this route, and her idea was creating fabric that was much safer for the environment. And I can't speak to these metals necessarily doing that, but with the plants and the vegetables that can be used, it's a way of creating clothing, things that you have close to your body, in a more environmentally and less toxic way of creating. And it's also a way with clothing that you have, maybe you love, it's kind of worn out or it's faded. These are ways that you can add something to it yourself to kind of give it a new life and keep reusing it, or cutting it and using that into, I'll use this heavier piece of wire here. And hi.
Hi, how are you?
Hi there. Good. You won't, yeah, feel free to look here. I'm giving a little demonstration on contact dyeing to create these different fabrics that I use for the Birch Tree Art.
Oh, is that your stack there?
Yes, those are
really pretty
scarves that I did with the same idea, but these actually incorporate flowers and vegetables as well as the metals.
But you're using those for the dye? No, for the print, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, for the, to color. These were white silk blanks, and then by incorporating things and then adding vinegar.
Getting colors.
Right, but it's also researching what is most effective in providing color. A lot of colorful flowers actually don't provide much color.
Is that right? That's interesting.
Yeah.
The only thing I've ever used is tea.
Oh yeah, that works too.
Yeah. Oh, so the flowers are for the color. I thought they were like a print, create a print.
Well, you
flower
can.
Too.
There's ways of doing
I
that
was like,
too, but I don't have examples of that right now. But you can pound flowers and.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so this is a bundle that I will be putting in the pot here, and I think I'll add a little bit more water, and I'll turn this on.
Yeah. I'm thinking this was really pretty. It's a pen.
What kind of heat do you put it on?
I'm putting this on high because it takes a while to, and I actually meant to squirt a little bit more vinegar on it. So I am going to, just get it, it helps with an oxidization process. So I'm just going to wet it down, a little vinegar. And I have it on high heat and just keep an eye on it. And I think I'll add a little bit more water. You want plenty of water in there, so you don't want it to go dry. However, you don't want your bundle actually sitting in the water. So I'm going to put the cover on this. So this I'll probably actually leave on for a couple of hours, and so that's why I did one ahead of time and opened it up so you could see what it was like, and then it did a demonstration of showing it. And these scarves here, as I mentioned earlier, are along the same ideas, and this is one of the classes that we offer at the folk school called Natural Dyson Steam Box, and I've been co-teaching it with a friend for several years here, and it's been really fun to do that. So it's the same idea, it's only adding other kinds of materials to it as well, and these are all silk except for the one on the end that it originally is silk and turned out mostly brown, and then I noodle felted it on top of that, and so that's a noodle felted scarf on the end, which is actually, noodle felting is a class that's offered at the folk school as well. So just wanted to give you an idea of, there's just so many possibilities out here, and I think inspiration for it has come in so many different ways. I just got this book this winter for Christmas for my daughter, Freeform Embroidery. It looks like it's got an Under the Sea piece on the cover of it to help with you expanding your ideas, and I've really come to I've gotten really interested in landscapes of different forms, and so that's kind of been the direction I've been headed. But it also always helps to have books that show you the basics of the actual individual stitches. And over the years, as I've developed more techniques using a whole variety of materials, that, as you can see, the embroidery threads, that I've got many colors at home, and these are actually, let's see, I think, oh, here it is. I was going to show this to you. And the wool scraps here that I've gotten from friends, that they're too small to use for anything else, and especially if it's a color that I'm really attracted to, even tiny little pieces, I'll take it, and oftentimes I can find a place for it. So with this collage idea, this is a new piece I just started actually for this weekend, and I experimented. It's a work in progress. I took a piece of scrap of wool that a friend gave me, and I did some dry felting, needle felting the background to give some shrubbery, some background depth of trees and foliage. And then I put in some birch trees in the background along there, and I used a light colored stitching to kind of help make it more distinctive from the foreground. And then my next step was laying in some of these pieces, which are actually the middle ground trees, and I'm using a darker thread, and I'm using a piece of fabric that actually has a little bit more color and depth to the pieces I used in the background, which were actually from this piece right here, which seemed kind of plain and dull. And then I laid some of my little wool scraps here. And then my next step, I will lay some additional birch trees. And I had one I started, I think this is it right here. I'm gonna just cut this off to show you. So this is from this piece here, and I'm going to start building. I'm putting some foreground trees, and they'll have a little bit more detail on them with the threads. And then so I'll add a few more of these, but I don't want to cover up all of my foliage background here, so I'll have to proceed cautiously, not get too carried away. And then with these pieces here, the wool pieces for the ground, I will be tacking down, and then I will be applying little stitches that will hold them in place, but they're actually going to add more color and interest as well, and they just make it more fun for me. The things that I do, I really try to add some whimsy or enjoyment by throwing different colors, and so I'll kind of go flip-flop by trying for a little bit of realistic by having actually look like bark, the different colorations and stuff, but then I'll throw on these bright colors and little stitches and with this on top of the scraps of wool, and I got little pieces of cheesecloth in here to add more texture. And this is kind of a fairly new thing for me, so as I keep working with it, I'll come up with new ideas to incorporate. I know some of my pieces actually have beads on the trees too for textures, and so it's kind of an amazing journey, and I love starting out with ideas and seeing where they take me, and so it's been a pleasure most of the time. I can't say with the sewing roll, that became torture, but left to my own devices and ideas and materials, I usually find some pretty good enjoyment in it. So as you can see with stitching, I'll be adding little threads to hold all these down and add interest and some textures with the threads, and then I'll come up along here and I'll add little plants that are popping up with the trees in the background, so they'll show up better with maybe a few flowers and things. So it's a kind of a mix. What I enjoy is kind of primitive art as well as the fine detail of silk ribbon embroidery, the kind of the elegance and the romantic aspects of it. So I like to, one day be working on something that's very, I'm not sure if I'm safe with my hands anymore, but touching after handling the metal, but things that are delicate as well as more the rustic primitive art. So and I have this book here as well to show you that you can actually, these same ideas you can apply to paper as well as fabric. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing. We'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you so